So tonight we want to talk about configuring, managing, and troubleshooting resource access. We've done this. This hopefully is somewhat of a review. This is permissions and attributes, things that you've done, may not realize you've done, encrypted file system, which we've done before. So this one is hopefully a review. I made one slide to put in that I hope will maybe bring some sense to the share and the NTFS permissions. That's usually the most confusing part of this, is what happens. What does each of these things mean? So with that, configuring, managing, and troubleshooting access to resources, the learning objectives, set up security for folders and files. Okay, no big deal. Right-click permissions, whatever permissions you want to have. The default permissions are on the shares are read to everyone. Before Windows 2003, I think, it was full control to everyone, which when you think about it, or when you first hear it, you say, boy, that's crazy. But it's really not crazy. And what I've found over the years since they changed it from full control to everyone to read for everyone has caused me more problems than anything else. Typically what I do is when I create a share is go in and change it to full control to everyone, because we're going to control access with NTFS permissions later on. So set up securities for files and folders, and when we get to sharing, you can only share folders. You cannot share files. If you want to share a single file, you still got to put it in a folder. So you can only share those things. Configure share folders and share folder security. We'll look at that. There is the exercise, the NTFS permissions exercise, linked again in the homework section for this chapter. Please do that. You may be asked questions about that later on. Not through that thing because it won't grade itself, but somehow. Install and set up distributed file system. Distributed file system is part of the file system services that you may or may not, when you put the file services on, you may or may not have added that. If you didn't, you just go back and add a role service to the file system. Distributed file system allows us to consolidate diverse locations of folders. And what it is somebody that didn't do a good job of organizing file system. Not a big deal. It's difficult to do that. It's really tough to guesstimate what you're going to need from now to eternity when you initially install these things. Configure disk quotas. Just so you know how to do that, this is something that I don't think is as significant now as it was just a few years ago when disks were much smaller. Depends on how much disk space you have, obviously, and how much disk space users have. What I've kind of observed over the years here is that students will basically use as much disk space as you give them. One of the things that did happen to us at one time, and this goes way back in NetWare 312 course, where they were putting in some directory structure, copying stuff, and somebody just kept copying the directory structure and putting it in, copying, putting it in, copying, putting it in, copying, putting it in, and wound up with several gig worth of the same information that just was kind of, mirror image on and on and on, simply because they didn't understand the file system of what they were actually doing, that they kept copying it. Disk quotas can prevent some of that. Disk quotas have done some odd things. In NetWare, we haven't had it in Windows, but in NetWare one time, a bunch of people couldn't print because their home directories were full. NetWare cached everything in the home directory instead of on the local machine. So different things that you may run into. Implement UNIX compatibility. This is obviously for the Linux. Microsoft really seems to be trying to become more compatible, play better with some of the other systems that are available. Steps for sharing resources. Okay, so if we're going to, we got this AGUP thing that we'll talk about. There is a specific process that Microsoft wants you to use when you give permissions, when you give share permissions, when you give NTFS permissions. And you should give the permissions to a group. We did this before. The users go into global groups. The global groups go into local groups, and the local groups get access to resources. And local groups, if run a domain controller, they're domain local groups, get access to resources. So the steps for sharing resources, create accounts and groups. So we're going to create the users that need the printer or need the file, need to see the PowerPoint presentations for CIS 2510, and give them access to that resource. So we would create the accounts and the groups. We already have the resource. We have the printer, or we have the file system there. Create access control list, ACLs. Access control list, right-click, put the group into the permissions list. That's the access control list. Who can actually get there? And inside the access control list, we're going to have the access control entries. The access control entries are the users that are in the list. And what are we going to do? Then we're going to give certain permissions. Do you always want users to be able to change documents? Probably don't want you to change the presentations, although you might make them better. But you're going to get read-only permission to that. Some other users are going to get the ability to change those files. Just like in the printers, when you give printer permissions, the default is the print permission, which means that you can use the printer, you can get a document out of it, you can cancel your own print jobs, then you can have more authority where you manage documents, you can cancel other people's print jobs. Types of access control lists, discretionary access control lists, and the discretionary, the DACLs, I think comes into play more understanding and being able to define the term in the security plus area. But the discretionary access control list meant that I right-clicked on a resource and I said I want to give permissions to the CIS 2510 Knights class to that resource. Discretionary, configured by the server administrator or owner of an object. And this goes back to the owner. The owner can change permissions. System access control list, information used to audit access to an object. An audit, they're going to talk about in a few minutes, cover it right now. Audit's a two-step process. One, you have to turn the policy on, and two, when you're auditing folders and files, you have to say who you want it audited and what you want audited. Success, failure is what we're going to do with these things. Discretionary and system access control lists for files and folders, attributes, permissions, auditing, and ownership, all things that we can configure, all things that are going to be part of what we can manage in these systems. Attributes stores the header information with each folder and a file, along with other characteristics, including volume label designations as a subfolder, date of creation, and time of creation. Attributes goes back to DOS. Attributes are characteristics of the file or folder itself. Read-only, system file, hidden file, whatever we're going to do that. And folders also can be assigned those attributes, and then when you copy them into that area, they assume them. Read-only and hidden, stored on the General tab in the NTFS folders or files properties dialog box. And again, this is something that's not new. We looked at this in Windows 7. Hopefully this is kind of a repeat. The advanced attributes, they archive, index, compress, and encrypt. Archive says that if the archive bit's set, it needs to be backed up. When we do a full backup or an incremental backup, we reset the archive bit to tell the system that it's been backed up. Indexing is there to make searching of the directory system faster. And you really want an index, I think, particularly with the larger and larger and larger drives. We put more and more and more information on them. We want to find more and more precise information about what's going on. I want to search, I mean, you may want to search inside the document to see if to find a particular word or a particular something in there. Compression and encryption, you can do one or the other. And when you go into the advanced on the tab, it looks like a checkbox, but if you try it, you check one, you check compress, and you say, I want to encrypt. You check encrypt, it turns the compress off. You can't compress an encrypted file. You can't encrypt a compressed file. That's because of the way the system works internally, that you would destroy the encryption with the if you compressed it. Going into these things into advanced, we have read-only and hidden here, the attributes, and inside archive and index, folders ready for archiving, index this folder for faster searching, and I think that's probably going to be the default. Try some of these things out. Turn this stuff off and see what happens. You're not going to break anything. If you do, we'll make you a new machine. But try these things out, see what happens. And it's like, I'm never going to do that again. I've done those on my home computer. It's like, boy, that really messed things up. Virtual machines are much better to try these things out on. But try them out. Compress contents to save disk space and encrypt contents to secure data. One of the things that the regular servers don't have that the storage server does have, and you can get software to do this, called single instance storage, so that if it finds a duplicate, it automatically reduces the amount of storage space because you only need the file one time in the system. Archive check to indicate the folder needs to be backed up because it's newer changed. Been there, done that. And if you look at those things, you can do that. Index for the Windows search service. And the Windows search service is part of the file system. It's not always that obvious as to how to get there. But that's something that you have to add. Install the file services role via the server manager. It's part of that. And I don't know, and you can look at it and see, I don't know and I don't remember, and I guess I should, whether it installs the search service by default or not. You may have to go back and add that as a role service. Index files, files in the documents folder, email files, photos, multimedia, files that are commonly accessed. The only thing it does is help you find those things quicker. Maintain it through the control panel. The folder and file attributes, indexed encrypted files, treat similar words with can't say it. Diacritics has different words, re-index, rebuild the index, a number of things you can do. They've got an exercise in the chapter that you go through and look at this, look at the indexing. Restore the index to its original settings, different things that you can do. Where are you going to store the index? As usual, lots of different things that you can configure in the Windows world. Compress reduces the amount of disk space reduced. The disadvantage is that when you compress it, when you want to use it, you've got to decompress it. So it's going to take some resources. It's going to take some CPU time, overhead to open the files, copy them. Encrypt allows you to encrypt folders or file to read it. I put a link on the Moodle page in the top of this week's on how does encrypting file system work. It's something that you may want to take a look at because when we start talking, when we get into security and start talking about encryption, we're going to find that we have two types. We have a public-private key, and then we have a single key. What this system actually does is uses the public-private key that you create when you encrypt for the first time. You'll create an encrypting file system certificate, and it will be used to encrypt the single key that's going to be much faster that's encrypting the file. And it then encrypts the key with your key and stores it in the document itself. If you have recovery agents, and if you don't have recovery agents, then you have some really great encrypted files that you can't get to if you lose your key. That can happen. That's why please back up your key, and I do have an activity that I want you to do in this one where you back up the key. It's just a matter of going into Internet Explorer and tell it to, or in the key management MMC, either one of them, to export the key to some location. And when you export the key, take your private key along with it, otherwise it's not going to be nearly as useful. Well, the private key is what's used in the encrypting file system. In the public key, private key, we use the private key encryption key associated with the user account encrypts the symmetric key, the single key that actually encrypts the document. Symmetric encryption can be up to 1,000 times more efficient than asymmetric, a public key, private key. So it really is worthwhile to do that. And most encryptions actually do that. They will use the public key, private key to encrypt the symmetric key, the single key that's used to actually do the encryption and the decryption of the documents themselves. So what happens in this, an encrypting file system, when you encrypt a file, the system generates a random symmetric key. It encrypts the document with that key. Once that's done, it encrypts the symmetric key with your private key. That doesn't make any sense. I'm just thinking that one through. It's got to be with your public key, because if we encrypted it with a private key, then anybody could decrypt it, because anybody can have your public key. So it encrypts it with a public key, and you decrypt it with your private key, the encryption that encrypts the symmetric key. Encrypt files and folders, and this one is another one that's not that big a deal. Right click, go into the advanced attributes and tell it to encrypt. Permissions is the area I think where initially you get confused, and this is one that sometimes you just got to try it out to see what happens. One of the things, and you may have seen me ask you when we do things, go to this, go to that, Dustin, can you get into Siraj home directory? We hope the answer is no. Sometimes things happen. Sometimes mistakes get made. You need to continuously try these things out. But in the permissions, control access to an object such as a folder or a file. If we set permissions on a folder, anything that is copied into that folder gets the permissions as it goes through the folder. And we had this little rule. They have a really big, long rule. I have a really short rule that you get the inheritance from the folder that it goes into, except when you move, cut and paste, move something on the same volume. If you move it on the same volume, all it does is changes the pointers in the file table. So in this one, the NTFS, we have full control modifier, read and execute, list folders, read and write, and go on down. We have allow and deny for each of these permissions. Deny is a really dangerous, check to deny, explicit deny is a really dangerous permission, because the only way to get rid of an explicit deny is to go to where you gave it. And it's not going to show up today or tomorrow. It's going to show up 6 months later, 2 years later, when you're trying to do something and all of a sudden this user that you're trying to give a permission can't get that permission. The safe way to do deny is what's called the implicit deny. When we give you permission to your home directory, and don't give anybody else permission to your home directory, because you have the permissions and other users don't, you can get in and they can't. Okay. Well, have you been able to get anybody else's home directory? Not yet. Not yet? Because we haven't made a mistake yet, right? Not yet. Mistakes do get made, but implicit deny is a safe way to do that rather than explicit deny. Explicit deny to me is kind of like an emotional thing. Oh, I'm going to get you and you're never going to get in here again, because it's going to override everything. Change the groups that have permissions to folders. When you initially look at a permission, you're probably going to see a number of them that are grayed, very light gray. Those are inherited permissions. You can't change them. You have to go into the advanced button and turn off inheritance and either copy them, copy the permissions, and I usually just copy the permissions when I do that, so that they're there, and then I can make the changes. But you can't change inherited permissions. They're inherited. The permissions, and this is mine. Permissions, we have two types of permissions, share and NTFS. They can either be local or remote. The share permission is remote only. Share permission allows you to see something across the network. The NTFS permission is both local and remote. And the share permission only has like 3 of them, right? Read. No, write's not one of them. What are they? Modify? No, it's not modify. Modify is an NTFS permission. And full control. Change. Read, change, and full control. They have implications, but the share permissions are very simple. And they only come into play when you access a resource across the network. NTFS permissions work whether you sit down at the computer or whether you access it across the network. So they're local and remote. The file systems they work on, shares work on FAT and NTFS. Shares been around since Windows 95. You could share resources in Windows 95. The logins and all that other things that go with protecting the resource wasn't really very good, but you had that ability. The NTFS permissions, obviously NTFS file system only. How much do you get? Most permissive, I don't know what else to say that, how much. You get the most permissive. If you're a member of 3 groups, and one of them gets read, and one of them gets read and write, and the other one gets full control, you got full control, the most permissive, the highest level that you're given in any location. Unless you have a deny anywhere. If anybody denies you, if you're in 12 groups and they have full control to the share folder, and you're in one group that has denied to the share folder, you're denied. One deny wipes out every other permission on that resource that you have. Whereas individually, share you get the most permissive, and NTFS you get the most permissive. When you put them together, when we share something across the network, you get the most restrictive. That's why when I went back to the first, I said, originally, the share permission was full control to everyone. And people have said, that's really not very smart. That's dangerous. But is it? Is it dangerous? This is a 50-50-90 question. Is it dangerous? What do you think, Suraj? Dangerous?
Is it dangerous to what?
To giving away resources, to allowing people to get into places they shouldn't be? Probably. What do you think, Rami? Yes or no? You think so? It is, huh? All right. See, we got a graduate here. Says it's dangerous. Why would it be dangerous? Where do share permissions work? Over network, remotely. And if I share something, and hopefully we're going to be using NTFS permissions, okay? If I share something, I've got to give an NTFS permission, right? So what if I give full control, share with full control to everyone, and then the NTFS permission, I give read-only to Jermaine? Is Dustin going to be able to get into that folder? Doesn't matter. Is Dustin going to be able to get in that folder? Nope. Why? Because one thing, we've just now done the implicit deny, because I gave it to Jermaine, didn't give it to Dustin. Dustin can't get in. But when I go across the network with the share, the full control, share, and the read NTFS, and I get the most restrictive permission, what permission does Jermaine have?
Too much.
Full control and read, what's the lowest? Read, so you get read. Doesn't matter that you got full control in the share. If we share a folder called share with full control, share permission, and then we give NTFS permissions of read to you, okay, what permission do you have? Read, because you get the most restrictive when you go across the network. Okay. And if you sat down at the computer, the share wouldn't matter anyway. You still get the NTFS permission. Right? Most restrictive. That's why. Is it a big deal when you share full control to everyone? Probably not. Unless you're using the wrong file system. If we were using the FAT file system, it might make a difference because we wouldn't have this in TFS control. And that goes back to the Windows 95 stuff. Hopefully you're not using FAT file system for anything of significance anymore at all. The different permissions, and I think this is in the book, full control, what each of these users can do, and you got the special permissions. Talk about the table of special permissions when you go into the advanced. If you go into the special permissions, it'll show you the individual components of the standard permissions. Gives you more control if you need it. I think that you're going to find that the standard permissions are probably going to be adequate for everything that you want to do. There may be some very specialized cases where they're not, but I really think they'd be pretty unusual. The thing to remember, and honestly, if we went up, read would probably be at the bottom. Each of the permissions, as you go up, implies the permission before it. If I have write implies read, which if I click on write and do that, just do some permissions, click on write, and it automatically puts a checkbox in the read permission also. If you click full control, it puts a checkbox in all of the, or checking all of the boxes. Inherited permissions and parent object permissions apply to the child object. The way you get your original permissions are from the root. I had a student one time that took everyone out of the root. Read to everyone, took them out of the root. Well, you know what happens with that? When you do that, Windows can't start. Because it's part of the everyone group. Yeah. So, well, the lab said to do that. Well, not exactly. It said after you do something else, do this, or don't do this, or whatever. But the permissions are inherited from folder to folder. And again, you can turn them off if you go into the advanced. And if you want to modify any of the even taking users out, any of the inherited permissions, you've got to turn off inheritance. And when you turn off inheritance, you copy the permissions and you get all of the permissions there are as explicit permissions. Once they're explicit permissions, no problem. You can modify them at will. Permissions of server operators, here we go. Include inheritable permissions in the object's parent. Uncheck this. Okay, it's going to say, what do you want to do? You want to delete them or you want to copy them? And this is just me. I always copy them because I may forget what was there, and I probably generally only going to want to change one or two things when I do that. And you can take them out and do whatever you want with them. If you do changes, there's another one here, replace existing inheritable permissions on all descendants. If we made some changes, and when we created the folder that has your home directories in it, there were some mistakes made initially, and we had to go back and change some permissions around. And when that happened, we wanted to replace all of the existing inheritable permissions. What this says is that unless you check this, replace the inheritable, it's not going to send it down the file system. It'll just be on the folder where you're changing this. Auditing, track the activity on the folder and a file activity. Did I tell you the story about the guy that actually did get in? I always talk about payroll, but somebody that actually did get into payroll. Yeah. And gave himself a pay raise. And he liked it so much, he gave himself another pay raise. And he was having so much fun that he changed the CEO of the company's pay to $1, and that's what got him caught. Can we find out who did these things? That's what auditing is about. Who did what? You can configure auditing for successes or failures. You can configure auditing for groups. Be careful of some of the things. If you audit like system events, you're going to fill up an audit log real quick. Object auditing, files and folders is a two-step process. First, you turn auditing on in the security policy. And then you go to the folder and say what you want audited and who you want it audited for. When you do labs, if you want to get an idea, generally, frequently, sometimes want you to see what happens. You got to audit you got to, when you do the action, you have to do an auditable action, otherwise it won't show up in the log. And these things are going to show up in the security log. And the only users that can get into the security log are administrators. This kind of goes around and around and around the world. And that's where the hackers are always going to want to get. And when you delete the security log, when you delete any of the logs, the first entry is who deleted the log. So just little things to think about and know about. Tracking what goes on. Do you need to do this? Maybe. What do you need to track? That's something that you got to decide based on the circumstance that you're in. You can track logons, attempted logons, somebody trying to brute force attack, a number of things that you can do in here. NTFS, files and folders, and this is, when we're talking about all of this clever stuff that we can do, you got to be in the NTFS file system. You can't do anything worthwhile, maybe a strong word, in the FAT file system. You need it to be NTFS. This is in the folder Auditing, Full Control. So name everyone, apply on this folder, subfolders and files, everything that is down there. And what do we want to audit? What people do. You pick what you want to audit. Folders are owned by the account that creates them. You cannot give away ownership. Ownership does a couple things. We're going to talk about disk quotas in a minute. Disk quotas, how much space you're taking on the disk, is based on which files and folders you own. So if Siraj wants a lot more storage space, then he gives all of his files as owners to Dustin. And now Dustin's out of disk space and Siraj's got a lot. You can't give them away. And the thing that I usually do, and maybe not very politically correct, but somebody that's downloading pornography and they know that there's going to be an audit on the system. They say, oh, let me just give away ownership of all this stuff so that that guy gets in trouble and not me. You can't give ownership. You can give permission to take ownership, but you can't give ownership away. And administrators can always take ownership. So if somebody thinks they've got everybody locked out, all the administrator needs to do is go and take ownership of that and give themselves permission. So those things can happen. They used to have a lab for that too in Windows 2000. They used to have some kind of, not really obvious labs that Joe Schmo suspects somebody's been looking at his files, and how does he know? How can he tell? Go look at ownership, see if the administrator took ownership or somebody else took ownership of the folder. Have the ability to change permissions, and that's why I want you to do that little activity. Take everybody out, see what happens, and then see if you can put yourself back in, put somebody back in. Transfer ownership administrators can always take ownership. You can give a permission to take ownership to somebody, but they have to accept the ownership. These permissions, since WinVista, look a little different. We get some kind of different. We get like co-owner and reader, or read the permission, and one other one, helper or something like that. You can go into the old conventional way with the share, but this here is the share permission that we're talking about. This is what it's going to look like when you do this. We'll look at, actually, I guess we could look at one of those real quick and see if this will let me do anything. Maybe we can look at this really quick. Properties, sharing. If I share this folder, I have a read-write. I can go to the drop-down. If I wanted to do everyone and add them, I add them as read. I can also read, write, remove. We have the owner up here is the administrator, and we could go in and give some permissions to take those away, but what this is the share permissions. The NTFS permissions on the security tab are going to look pretty standard. We'll go into advanced. See, I don't have permissions. I'm not an administrator. I can't change the permissions. I don't have the authority to change the permissions. But I can give myself authority. How about that? User access control. The user that I'm logged on does have eventually local administrators, not a domain administrator, but local administrator. Do you notice that we don't have include inheritable permissions in this folder? And since we don't have inheritable permissions in this folder, when we go back to it, edit, the permissions, or in users, they're not grayed out. Those are explicit permissions, and they can be changed. We can take them away. I guess we can fool around with this a little bit. Take them away down here. And then we go into write, read and execute, modify full control. What do we want to give the user? We can do that. Again, the explicit deny is something that we don't want to do. I'm going to cancel out of here so that I don't mess something up for the administrator. But the permissions, share permissions, NTFS permissions. The first thing we do is share it. Can access across the network. Hopefully I've beaten that one to death. Changed in Windows Server 2008 from the previous version, make person offering to share more aware of the security options. And you can always go down to it's got the share, and then below it says, I want to go the old-fashioned way. You can go the old-fashioned way with these. And this is what we looked at. We have the owner. Everyone's a reader is a read-only, and then we have the read-write permissions that we could also give to this user. If you didn't want to go through that share, you can go to advanced sharing, and it's going to show up as the standard would. Let's see if I can do this one. As a standard would, just like we're given the NTFS permissions. Let's go over here on a different folder. Let's see what we can do. DU. DU is a cool little property. Sharing, advanced sharing. Share this folder. Permissions, and this looks kind of like the standard that you've seen before. And the default, you notice, is read to everyone. The reason I keep making a point about that, and maybe it's just me that always forgets, sometimes I want to make a share that I'm managing a share across the network that I won't be able to put stuff into. If you don't go in and change this permission, guess what? I got to give myself full control of NTFS and share it, and golly, when I put them together, I have read, and I can't put the stuff in there. And I guess that goes back to the way that it was when I originally started this, that it was full control at the time. But that is the default, and that's the way in advanced sharing you can use the original sharing method through the advanced sharing tab in order to do that. So through the security tab, NTFS, and we've looked at each of those things. The 4 shared permissions associated with the folder: reader, contributor, co-owner, and owner. Reader, read only. Contributor can edit it. Co-owner is like the full control, and the owner's full control. So owner and co-owner are going to have the ability to do more. It's a full control permission. Contributors the change permission, and readers the read permission, if you go back to the old way of doing things. Folder caching, files and programs the user specify will be available offline. This is something that can be really handy. And the point they make, and I guess that Microsoft must not have very reliable networking, because they keep talking about these remote offices that have unreliable network connectivity. What happens here is you can work offline. If you go on trips, you can work offline. Cache the file and folder with offline files. It's stored locally on the machine, and then if you lose connectivity, when you get connectivity back, it updates the server. Same thing when you go away, take your laptop away, take the files with you. The one that you may want to look at that is, let's say that Ramin's going to be the salesman. We'll make him the salesman tonight. And he's going to go from Roanoke to, we want to go to Chicago. It's nice and cold there today. And he's going to give a presentation. And whether Dustin has a job next week or not depends on how good a job Ramin does in the presentation. And he gets to Chicago, and he finds out he doesn't have the presentation. If we did offline files, it would automatically be cached, be stored on his machine. And if he made changes to it while he was on the trip and he came back, it got uploaded. It gets synchronized with the system itself. That's something that's kind of handy to do. Publish an object, make it available for users to access in Active Directory contents. When you publish something, you go publish it to Active Directory. One of the things that I guess I did it in the Active Directory one is ask you to publish your printers that you have on the machine, publish them in your Active Directory. Publishing a shared folder in Active Directory, make it available to users, the Active Directory contents. The Directory Services Client enables older operating systems to search Active Directory. The publishing objects, publishing folders in Active Directory, this sounds like you just publish it. What you usually have to do is create a folder object that represents a share. So that is available. We've never actually published folders in that. We share, obviously, and you see shares, you get the shares. You have shares mapped. We've never actually published them in Active Directory. The old Directory Services Client, that goes way back. The newer clients, most of the clients that you're going to see, the XPs, the Vistas, the Windows 7s, are going to be able to do Active Directory searches. The Effective Permissions tab is something that can come in handy because when you get this user promoted and all of a sudden you put them in a group and they don't get the permissions that you expected them to, what are the effective permissions? And that goes back to if you've given them the explicit deny, that may be able to help you troubleshoot that. But what permissions do they have after you get through with all of the groups that they're a member of? This is something that's handy. It came in 2003 server. Before that, you just had to manually keep track of all the groups that users ran, what permissions they had. Now you can get the effective permissions without having to go through a manual calculation. Copied or moved. The copied or moved, again, you inherit unless you move something on the same volume, you're going to inherit the permissions. Distributed file system, this is a role, or actually a role service that gets added to it. What it allows us to do is cover up our mistakes in the file system if we didn't organize it very well. If we have files in different locations, we can bring them together under a single root, and they appear to be in a single structure, even though they're not. There's two types of DFS, a local, which can only bring together files on a local server, and domain. In a domain DFS, you can have folders from any machine in the domain. And you can also have them in different locations, have the roots on multiple machines, which allows you to have redundancy and replication. Would also help you out if you have multiple sites and you have users accessing the same file. And then you could have a DFS server in Greenville and a DFS server in Roanoke and a DFS server in Raleigh, and they would have locally stored. If one of them went down, you could always go get the information from the other. But it is something that works pretty well. It's been around since Windows 2000, I think, is probably when it first started here. Advantages: saves time searching, NTFS access permissions, fault tolerance, load balancing, so that we can have different users accessing different physical locations. This isn't designed for files that change frequently, because it does have to go through a replication process in order to get them there. So web-based internet and intranet just have multiple locations for those. Backups more easily. Important information not lost. When a disk drive on one server fails, one of them dies, then you've got it replicated in a different location. Standalone domain-based takes advantage of Active Directory. Servers and workstations that are members of the domains. Standalone, no Active Directory. A single flat level share. A single means that it's got a single root on a server, but you can make a lot of different folders appear to be under a single root, even if they're not. The namespace root, and they're going to have you go through these things, and this is distributed file system, is in the file server services, and I think you put on the file server already. You may or may not have included that. If you didn't, you just go back to the file server service and add a service role to it. And those are just the ones that got the activity there to do that. The tasks involved, and again, these are the things that you're going to go through when you create this in the lab. UNC, Universal Naming Convention format, is what it uses. And that's what we mostly use for SMB arrangements. Delegating management, day-to-day activities managed by a system or another person. Right-click the namespace and delegate management permissions. This is another one that may want to consider groups here. You did some delegation or will do some delegation in the Active Directory. If you delegate it to an individual when you want to take them out, when you want to take those away, you have to go into the individual object to take them away. If you use groups and you want to change them, you take them out of the group and put the new user in the group. Same thing here. So this is one I really would recommend that you use groups when you do the delegations. To me, it just simply makes things simpler to try to take care of, to try to track. Deleting the namespace root, and they'll have you do all that in the activity, so I'm just going to go through these. DFS replication, faster, more reliable recovery, faster for all sizes, more efficient over LANs. How many times have you seen this? Improvements, it's better. It is better. 2008 is better than 2003. 2003 is better than 2000. 2000 is better than NT4. NT4 better than NT 3.5. So the next one, will it be better? Odds are yes. They work better. Disk quotas prevent users from filling disk capacity, and as I told you earlier, based on observation, students, users in general will use all the disk space available. My home directory, of course, I've been here for quite a while. My home directory is, I don't know, probably around 3 or 4 gig. That's a lot of text files. There are probably some videos in there. I guess I should look and see. I should use the indexing function there and search it, huh? See what's there. But tracks the capacity, allows you to configure what happens when the users get to capacity, whether you want to say no, you want to send them a warning, you want to log it, what do you want to do. They're going to have you go through an activity to see all of the things that you can do. What it does is it can track, or it can keep users from putting in any more files on the disk. May be significant at home if you're using a computer and sharing it with somebody else. What do you want to do with that? The one user that is exempt from disk quotas is the user administrator, because he owns everything. On the server, everything gets installed, it belongs to the administrator. If you put quota on the administrator, you're probably going to lock him out pretty quick. If you have users who need more disk space, you can modify that. You set up the disk quotas as a general policy, and then you have to go in and manage the exceptions to the policy. Deny disk space, deny limit, and these are the things that you're going to see. Set the warning level. What happens when you exceed, and usually, like I said, 80%, you want to send them a message that says you're nearing your capacity. We found that sending the message doesn't always really work all that well. But it will lock them out. Disk is full. Won't let you save anymore. Subsystem for Unix-based applications, compatibility with Unix, Linux, with Linux predominantly systems. Allows them to function better in a domain and with the Windows softwares. Compiler. This one, take a look at this. I don't think there's an activity in here. This is another one of those, and I say that kind of a bunch of them. Another one of those that say, oh, here, it's easy. Some of this stuff is you've got to go through in several iterations in order to make some of this stuff work. What it does is good. Getting there is not always as easy as clicking on some Microsoft stuff. Server information, new information. So, access lists. What are we going to do? How are we going to control access to resources? A couple of, I think, important concepts to take away. One, the discretionary access control is the one that we made. Share NTFS permissions. Individually, you get the most permissive. When you put them together, you get the most restrictive. How do permissions work? It can be a big deal. It can get you in trouble, can keep you out of trouble, can help you, if you learn how to set them up, can help you do a number of different things. Provide another level of permissions, a level of security as we go through these things. Folders can be shared. Share permissions across the network, remote only. NTFS permissions, local and remote. Put them together, most restrictive individually, most permissive. The effective permissions tab really is something that can help out when we do these things. Distributed file system. There are some campuses in ECPI that use DFS. Ones that have campuses, maybe 2 campuses in a city, like in Charlotte has 2 campuses and Raleigh have 2 campuses. Or Raleigh. Richmond has 2 campuses. Richmond, I know, is using DFS because we've had some students transfer here from there, which means that they can have information, common information that's at both campuses through the DFS, Active Directory DFS systems. Disk quotas keeps you from running out of disk space. When you do disks, when you do home directories, when you do all the other things that you're going to do to allow people to put things on, have that on something other than the system volume, because if you don't, you may find yourself with a system that doesn't work. Questions? Hopefully some of this was a review. We did a lot of this, some of the server-specific things we obviously didn't do in the Windows 7 class, but the permissions and the way permissions work we did. This is a second dose. Hopefully it makes more sense. Please do that permissions exercise. And yes, I can see if you did it or not. Oh yeah, I know how to read logs. Questions? Let's take a break.